backfill that need for retirement funds. And then you just get to leaders themselves. Sometimes we have weak leaders, and they've got their own self-interest thing going on, or the opposite side, they are micromanaging leaders. And so you get all these young people that want to come in and do make an investment, but then when they're told what to do and how to do things, they actually lose motivation. So it's a fraught workplace, and there's inbuilt paradoxes too. On one hand, we hire people for a certain kind of a mastery, ask them to have certain skills and the ability to do certain things. And at the same time, because of the organizational struggles, many times people are pulled into roles that they're not qualified for or not skilled in. So they have to juggle roles even while they got hired for one thing, and then they're asked to do something else. On the other hand, one of the paradoxes is you're hired as an individual and for your unique talents, skills, personality even. But once you get into the workplace, if you don't conform to the norms of that culture or that organization, you feel out of place. You don't feel like you belong, or you're considered as someone who doesn't want to play by the rules. So how do you juggle being an individual along with conformity or groupthink in an organization? Then you have the whole thing about organizations will hire you saying they want you to be creative, and then you've got to deal with compliance and standardization within the organization based on whatever it is that you do. There's a whole thing about diversity now. It's a big term, hiring for diversity, and yet how are we going to align with the organizational values and norms and so on, for better or worse? There's the fact that we live in a time of change, and yet most people don't really like change a whole lot. So they're seeking some kind of stability. And how do you juggle change and stability? And I'll just finish off with this one. I mentioned earlier, customer experience. That's another big buzzword at the moment, where organizations want you who are working in the organization to provide top-notch and excellent customer experience, as much because people go on these social media sites and rate you once they've left, for better or worse. And yet, because of all the other demands and things going on in the organization and your role, you feel fragmented. And so how do you provide that excellent customer experience, which should feel holistic, which should feel like you're giving them your attention and presence when the demands being made on you are very high? Add to that in a lot of organizations, there are up to 5 generations between the post-World War II, what they call the Great Generation, through boomers, and then X, Y, and Z generations. These different groupings, as a sort of stereotypical whole, have different values and also different communication preferences. So there are so many different dynamics going on in most workplaces that could lead to this notion of human flourishing being something very difficult to deliver. So how are we going to handle that? Well, first of all, is being aware of it, so that leadership within the organization takes note, takes the pulse of the culture, and also that people within it basically ask for what they need, or better yet, even apply to work in places where there is a match with your values, with your motivation, with what matters to you in terms of how you're spending your time individually and what the organization does as their role or their output in society. But on an individual level, you can also start with some really simple things. One of them, in fact, is breathing. We tend to underestimate the power of our breath. And I think there's some interesting factoids about breathing and breath, one of which is that it's the first thing we do when we're born into this world. I mean, we've all heard the stories or seen the pictures in the movies of the doctor or the midterm, giving a little baby a tap on the butt to get him to cry. the reason they do that is it's the way to clear out the lung fields, because that child has, up to that moment of birth, been encapsulated in a water sac, the amniotic fluid. And so they have to open the lungs and siphon out any liquid mucus from the mouth. And crying, is a good way to kickstart that. At the same time, it's also the last thing we do at death. And I've actually had the opportunity, if you want to call it that, of being with my father as he died, literally at his last breath. And it was a long, rattly exhale. And that was him passing. And it's also, by the way that doctors measure your sense of longevity. They measure lung capacity. And that's a current practice. Now, the other thing about breath, if you think about breathing, which happens in the moment, it's involuntary. In other words, it happens without us thinking about it until we start paying attention to it, until we become mindful about it. Then we can shift our attention to now. And that's why practices such as yoga and meditation talk about paying attention in the now and being mindful and concentrating on your breathing. It keeps you in the now. Now, the cool thing about the now is it gives you a pivot point to assess yourself and say, where am I now relative to where I want to be going, or the goals I'm working on, be they personal or professional. And so it's a good assessment tool on an individual level, but you can also sort of take the pulse or take the breath of your team or of an organization. And overall, just be conscious of creating a culture where people can breathe. And one of the simple exercises you can do is 5 by 5 by 5 breaths. And that is 5 inhales through your nose, 5 counts of holding your breath and pushing out your lungs to expand your lung fields, and then 5 counts of breathing out through your mouth. And if you do this 5 times, 2 times a day, you actually expand your lifespan, frankly, but you expanding your lung capacity, but it also keeps you much more sharp and having the ability to concentrate, simply because you're keeping your air supply and therefore your oxygen supply to your brain fresh. Another thing you can do is pay attention in your environment. Have high quality air at a workable temperature that's comfortable. Make sure you have enough light. Statistically, people who are 60 or older need 3 times more light than people in their 20s and 30s. So be aware in terms of lighting provided. Also the furniture that you're on. If it's not comfortable, it doesn't allow you to write properly, read, do what you need to at your desk. You need to find more ergonomically comfortable, functionally workable furniture, be they chairs, tables, desks, and whatever. You want to have the tools that you need to get the job done handy. And also, as much as possible, become distraction free. Now that may require that you sequester yourself in a distraction free environment and take it from there. Now there's a lot more involved in human flourishing. We can talk about the focus on mastery, on autonomy with appreciation and purpose, but I think we'll leave that for another day. Just be aware that as an organization, you can filter in people who are not suffering the miserable situations we talked about before, who know how to navigate or choose which side of the paradox they want to fall on in order to have a flourishing experience individually, but also in an organization in a more collective capacity. So with that in mind, I'm going to just suggest that what we're going to do is the next 2 issues of my presentation, the Game Changer Thinking, we're going to focus on 2 elements that underlie human flourishing. One is focus, and another one is creativity. So just tune in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be discussing those segments so that you, yourself, and people around you can flourish, because that's, after all, what we want. So wishing you to remember that the life you live is the legacy you leave. Bye-bye now.